The wedding reception sparkled with golden lights and champagne toasts, but Marcus Williams sat frozen at table 12, watching his entire career flash before his eyes. There, just 3 tables away, sat Richard Blackstone, his boss, the senior partner who held Marcus's future in his hands, the same man who had made it crystal clear during countless firm meetings that traditional family values were non-negotiable at a Blackstone and Associates. Marcus adjusted his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, his lawyer-trained mind calculating the odds of escape. 6 years of law school, 4 grueling years building his reputation, and now it could all crumble because he was gay at his cousin Sarah's wedding in suburban Connecticut. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent months perfecting the art of being invisible, of code switching between his authentic self and the sanitized version that climbed corporate ladders. At work, he was the rising star who never mentioned weekend plans or dating. At family gatherings, he was the successful nephew who skillfully deflected questions about settling down. But tonight, both worlds had collided in the worst possible way. Blackstone's presence wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah had assured him it would be just family, maybe some college friends. She hadn't mentioned that her new in-laws included the Blackstone family legacy. Marcus watched as his boss shook hands with the groom's father, their conversation punctuated by hearty laughs and backslaps. Uncle Bob, Sarah's father's brother, chose that moment to lumber over with his trademark scowl and a scotch that wasn't his first. The man who had spent every family gathering since Marcus came out making pointed comments about lifestyle choices and the decline of American values. Bob's eyes swept the room with obvious distaste before landing on Marcus. "Well, look who showed up alone again," Bob announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Still haven't found yourself a nice girl, have you, Marcus? Maybe you're just not trying hard enough." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt his chest tighten, his breathing becoming shallow. Across the room, Blackstone glanced in their direction, his expression unreadable. Marcus fumbled with his watch again, the metal warm against his sweating palm. This was exactly what he had feared. The careful walls he had built between his professional and personal life were crumbling in real time. In a room full of couples, dancing, and families celebrating, he had never felt more exposed, more alone. The reception hall suddenly felt suffocating. 200 guests, and he was drowning in plain sight. But sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes a stranger's kindness can change everything in a single moment. Sometimes the very thing that threatens to destroy you becomes the catalyst for finding exactly what you've been searching for. What happened next would challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about love, authenticity, and the courage it takes to choose yourself over safety. Stay with Heart Stories to discover how one conversation can transform a life forever. Because the most powerful love stories often begin in the moments when we feel most lost. The path to finding someone who truly sees you sometimes starts with learning to see yourself clearly, even when the reflection feels too dangerous to acknowledge. Marcus was still fumbling with his watch when a calm voice cut through his spiral of panic. "Mind if I sit here and maybe act like we're together?" The voice belonged to a man in his late 20s with dark hair and kind eyes that seemed to understand exactly what Marcus was going through. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, carrying himself with the kind of confidence that Marcus had always envied in others. Before Marcus could process what was happening, the stranger slid into the empty chair beside him with practiced ease. He moved like someone accustomed to reading rooms and adapting quickly, his presence immediately shifting the energy at their isolated table. "I'm David," he said quietly, extending his hand. "David Chen, and you look like you could use an ally right about now." Marcus stared at the offered hand, his mind racing. "Marcus Williams, but I don't understand why you would—" "Because I recognize that look," David interrupted gently. "The one that says you're trying to disappear in plain sight. Trust me, I've worn it myself." As if on cue, Uncle Bob approached again, his disapproval radiating like heat from asphalt. But this time, David rose smoothly from his chair, extending his hand with a disarming smile. "You must be family," David said warmly. "I'm David, Marcus's boyfriend. I've heard so much about everyone." The word boyfriend hung in the air like a perfectly executed legal argument, clean, confident, leaving no room for debate. Marcus watched Uncle Bob's face cycle through confusion, surprise, and reluctant politeness as social conditioning kicked in. "Oh," Bob managed, clearly thrown off his prepared script. "Well, that's nice." David's hand found Marcus's shoulder with natural ease, and Marcus felt his anxiety tick finally still. For the first time all evening, his hand dropped away from his watch. "Marcus was just telling me about the beautiful ceremony," David continued, his voice carrying just enough warmth to seem genuine without overselling. Sarah looked radiant walking down that aisle. As Uncle Bob retreated with his deflated confrontation, Marcus marveled at how effortlessly David had dismantled the tension. But more than that, he noticed how David's presence had changed the entire dynamic around their table. Other family members were glancing over with curiosity rather than pity. "College friends who reconnected through work," David said quietly, anticipating Marcus's question. "That's our story if anyone asks. Simple, believable, hard to poke holes in." Marcus studied David's profile, noting the slight tension around his eyes that suggested this performance came at a cost. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." David's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. "Let's just say I understand what it feels like to need rescuing. And sometimes the universe puts you exactly where someone else needs you to be." Across the room, Marcus caught sight of Blackstone watching their table with mild interest rather than suspicion. For the first time since arriving, Marcus felt like he could breathe properly. "So what's your real story?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with his directness. "Marketing executive from New York," David replied. "And you're obviously a lawyer. You have that careful way of speaking that comes from years of choosing words that won't be used against you later." The observation was so accurate it made Marcus laugh, a genuine sound that felt foreign after hours of forced pleasantries. David's answering smile was different too, less performance and more recognition. "Very Hallmark Christmas movie of us, isn't it?" David said with self-deprecating humor. "The whole fake boyfriend at a family function thing. I should clarify that when I said boyfriend, I mean in the collaborative sense of," Marcus began, his lawyer training kicking in. "Marcus, right, yes, together." Something shifted between them in that moment of shared laughter. What had started as a strategic alliance was beginning to feel like something else entirely. The chemistry was unexpected, undeniable, and absolutely terrifying for a man who had spent years keeping his heart safely locked away. Sometimes the most profound connections begin not with grand romantic gestures, but with someone simply choosing to stand beside you when you need it most. True courage often looks like ordinary kindness extended to a stranger at exactly the right moment. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm when everything changed in an instant. Marcus was actually enjoying himself for the first time all night, listening to David share a story about a disastrous client presentation, when he spotted a familiar figure entering through the main doors, tall, athletic, with the kind of effortless charm that had once made David's heart race. James. David's laugh died mid-sentence as he followed Marcus's gaze. His entire body tensed, the easy confidence draining from his posture like air from a punctured balloon. "Ex-boyfriend," Marcus asked quietly, recognizing the look of someone confronting their past. 3 years together. Found him in our bed with my best friend 6 months ago," David said, his voice carefully neutral. "I knew he'd be here. Best friend of the groom. I just thought I was ready to see him." Before Marcus could respond, another complication arrived. His parents, Frank and Linda Williams, appeared at their table with the kind of determined smiles that meant they had been discussing strategy in the parking lot. "Marcus, sweetheart," his mother exclaimed, her voice pitched slightly too high. "We wanted to surprise you. Dad got off work early and we thought it was time we supported you properly." The weight of their good intentions hit Marcus like a freight train. His parents, who had struggled for years to understand his sexuality, were finally making an effort, and they were doing it at the worst possible moment. "Mom, Dad, this is David," Marcus managed, his voice tight with sudden pressure. David rose smoothly, extending his hand with genuine warmth despite his own turmoil. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, Marcus talks about you both constantly." "Oh, he does?" Linda's face lit up with surprised pleasure. "How long have you two been together?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus felt his chest constricting, the familiar panic rising as multiple worlds collided. Across the room, Blackstone was still watching. James was approaching their general area. His parents were beaming with hopeful anticipation. "We should get some air," David said suddenly, his hand finding Marcus's elbow. The garden looked beautiful from the windows. They escaped through the French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking manicured grounds. The cool evening air hit Marcus's face like a lifeline, but his breathing was still shallow and rapid. "Hey, lawyer boy, look at me," David said, his voice gentle but firm. "Breathe with me. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Marcus followed David's rhythm, focusing on the steady cadence of his voice. Gradually, his heartbeat slowed, his vision cleared. When he finally looked up, David was studying him with an expression that was part concern, part recognition. "Panic attacks," David asked. "Only when my entire life is imploding simultaneously." Marcus replied with shaky humor. David's laugh was soft and understanding. "I get it. Really, that whole scene in there. It's a lot." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the distant sound of the reception filtering through the glass doors. Marcus found himself studying David's profile in the garden lighting, noting the way shadows played across his features. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus said. "We're fake dating. I think that ship has sailed. Why did you really come tonight, and don't say it was random kindness?" David was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "Because I wanted James to see that I was okay, that I had moved on." Pathetic, right? Not pathetic, human. And now he's here, and I realize I'm not okay at all. I'm just really good at the pretending. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than shared circumstance. "I've spent my whole career pretending to be someone else. Someone straighter, more conservative, safer. But tonight with you, I keep forgetting to pretend." Their eyes met and held, the space between them charged with possibility. For a moment, it felt like David might lean closer, like Marcus might let him. But then voices carried from inside, and then the spell broke. "We should go back," David said, though he didn't move. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, making no effort to leave. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats, both caught in the strange liminal space between performance and reality, between safety and risk. When they finally returned to the reception, something fundamental had changed between them. The pretending felt different now, layered with genuine emotion that neither was quite ready to name. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the spaces between words, in the moments when two people recognize their own struggles reflected in someone else's eyes. The moment they returned to the reception, Marcus knew something had shifted in the room's energy. Uncle Bob stood near the bar, his face flushed with alcohol and righteous indignation, holding court with a small group of relatives. His voice carried clearly across the dance floor. "I'm just saying, there's something unnatural about it all. These lifestyle choices, they're destroying the fabric of American families. Look at what's happening to our children being influenced by all this propaganda." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound, but before he could retreat into his familiar pattern of silent endurance, David stepped forward with quiet determination. "Excuse me," David said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made conversations stop. "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about lifestyle choices. Uncle Bob turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized David. And you are someone who's lived long enough to understand that love isn't a choice, but how we respond to it is. David's tone remained perfectly civil, but there was steel underneath. Marcus is one of the kindest, most principled people I've ever met. If that threatens your idea of family values, perhaps the problem isn't with him. The group around Bob shifted uncomfortably. Other guests had begun to notice the confrontation, their conversations tapering off as attention focused on the unfolding drama. Marcus felt his chest tightening again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was something fiercer, more protective. Now listen here, Bob began, his voice rising. No, you listen. David's composure never wavered, but his words carried the weight of years of experience. Marcus has achieved more by 30 than most people do in a lifetime. He's successful because of who he is, not despite it. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing an extraordinary person. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt tears threatening, not from shame, but from the overwhelming experience of being defended so completely, so publicly. No one had ever stood up for him like that before. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Across the room, Marcus caught sight of Blackstone approaching, his expression unreadable. Worse, James had materialized beside their table, his familiar smile carrying all the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. David, James said warmly, as if the last 6 months hadn't happened. You look incredible. We need to talk. The timing couldn't have been worse. Blackstone was close enough to overhear. Marcus's parents were watching with concerned expressions, and the wedding photographer had chosen that moment to approach their group with a camera in hand. Mr. and Mrs. Williams mentioned you'd like some photos of the happy couple, the photographer said brightly, completely oblivious to the tension crackling around them. Marcus felt the familiar paralysis setting in, his lawyer brain calculating all the ways this could destroy everything he'd worked for. Blackstone was steps away. James was creating a scene. His parents were beaming with pride that felt increasingly dangerous. Actually, Marcus heard himself saying, his voice sounding hollow and distant, I think there's been a misunderstanding. David's head snapped toward him, confusion and hurt flickering across his features. Marcus, we're not... this isn't... Marcus fumbled for words, his professional training warring with everything his heart was screaming. We were just being friendly. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of confusion and disappointment. David's face went carefully blank, the kind of expression Marcus recognized from his own mirror after years of practice. Right, David said quietly. Just being friendly. James stepped closer, sensing opportunity. David, we should catch up properly, somewhere private. Marcus watched as David looked between him and James, something fundamental breaking behind his eyes. The man who had defended him so fiercely just moments before now looked like a stranger, polite and distant. Of course, David said to James, his voice professionally pleasant. That sounds perfect. As they walked away together, Marcus felt the full weight of his choice settle over him like a suffocating blanket. He had chosen safety over truth, career over connection. The familiar protection of his carefully constructed walls felt hollow now. Prison bars he had built himself. Sarah appeared at his elbow, her wedding dress rustling with indignation. You're an idiot, she said without preamble. That man was head over heels for you, and you just threw it away because you're scared. Marcus watched David laugh at something James said across the room, the sound carrying a forced brightness that made his chest ache. It wasn't real, Sarah. We were just pretending. Were you? Sarah asked pointedly. Because from where I was standing, that was the most real I've ever seen you. The truth of her words cut deeper than Uncle Bob's cruelty ever could. For a few precious hours, Marcus had experienced what it felt like to be authentically himself with someone who saw and accepted all of him. And he had thrown it away the moment it became inconvenient. Sometimes the most painful lessons come not from what others do to us, but from what we do to ourselves when fear overrides our heart's deepest knowing. Marcus spent the next hour watching David from across the room, his chest aching with every shared laugh between David and James. The reception was winding down, guests beginning to filter toward the exits in couples and small groups, leaving behind a trail of champagne glasses and wilted centerpieces. When Marcus finally spotted David heading toward the parking lot alone, something deep inside him snapped into clarity. He had spent years choosing safety over authenticity, and where had it gotten him? Sitting alone at family gatherings, hiding his true self behind professional masks, and now watching the first real connection he had felt in years walk away into the night. He found David loading a small gift bag into the trunk of his car, movements precise and controlled in a way that suggested barely contained emotion. "David, wait." David turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Forget something." "Yeah, my courage." Marcus took a shaky breath, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "I've spent my whole career pretending to be someone else, someone straighter, more acceptable, safer. But with you tonight, I forgot to pretend." "So what changed in the last hour?" David's voice carried a hurt that made Marcus's chest tighten. "I realized I'd rather be unemployed and authentic than successful and invisible." David studied him for a long moment, searching for something in Marcus's face. "And what about your boss? Your career?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I know I can't keep living like this, hiding who I am, pretending I don't need anyone. The truth is, I need you. And that terrifies me because I've never needed anyone before." Something shifted in David's expression, the careful walls beginning to crack. "Can I tell you something? I didn't come here tonight to find love. I came to make James jealous, to prove I was over him. And are you?" "I thought I was, until I met someone who made me remember what it feels like to be seen for who I really am, instead of who someone wants me to be." They stood in the parking lot silence, the distant sound of the reception fading behind them. Marcus felt lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth had physically removed weight from his shoulders. "Well, isn't this touching?" They turned to find Blackstone approaching, his expression unreadable in the parking lot lighting. Marcus's newly found courage faltered, professional anxiety flooding back as his boss's footsteps echoed on the asphalt. "Mr. Blackstone," Marcus began, but his boss held up a hand. "I couldn't help but overhear. And I have to say, Marcus, in 6 years of working together, I've never seen you this animated." Marcus braced for the professional death blow, but Blackstone's next words caught him completely off guard. "My son came out to me last year, 23 years old, and he was terrified to tell his old man. You know what I learned? I almost lost him because he thought I couldn't love who he really was." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility Marcus had never dared imagine. "Good lawyers are hard to find," Blackstone continued. "Great lawyers who fight for what matters are even rarer. I'd hate to lose one over something as irrelevant as who he loves." As Blackstone walked away, Marcus felt David's hand slip into his, warm and steady and real. "So," David said quietly, "want to try this again? For real this time?" Marcus squeezed his hand, marveling at how such a simple touch could feel like coming home. "I'd like that, but fair warning, I'm new at this whole being authentic thing. Lucky for you, I happen to collect vintage postcards. I'll send you one every day until you figure it out." 6 months later, Marcus made partner at Blackstone and Associates. David had relocated to Connecticut, trading his Manhattan apartment for a small house with a garden and room for his growing postcard collection. When Emma announced her engagement and declared herself their wedding planner, Marcus and David exchanged a look that said everything about timing, choice, and the courage to love authentically. The path to genuine happiness often requires us to risk everything we think we want for everything we actually need. Sometimes the greatest act of bravery is simply allowing ourselves to be fully seen and loved for who we truly are. Have you ever had to choose between safety and authenticity in your own life? What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow Heart Stories for more tales of love, courage, and the transformative power of choosing truth over fear. Because every heart deserves a story worth telling.